This is issue number 318 of the Secret Identity podcast for March 15th, 2011. Today we debut a brand new gaming segment on Secret Identity called Co-op Critics, and myself and Mr. Dan Evans tackle Bulletstorm for a good solid hour covering the gameplay, the story, the multiplayer, and everything you ever wanted to know and probably didn't about the game.
3, 2, 1!
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. That's how rude stuff. Who are you? Nobody makes me bleed my own blood. Nobody.
I'm a reasonable guy, but I've just experienced a very unreasonable man. My calculations are correct. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious...
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
And this is Brian here, and this is a brand new gaming segment for Secret Identity. I wanted to do a quick intro to this segment because as you listen to the discussion between Dan Evans and myself about Bulletstorm, the brand new first-person shooter for PS3 and 360, I wanted to make sure that you took a look at the show notes. If you go to the forums on Secret Identity, and even I will put a post up on the actual blog itself, what you'll see is some links to the trailer for Bulletstorm, a video of some of the gameplay, and also a link to the interview that I did with Rick Remender back at time of San Diego Comic-Con about the story for the game. So we kind of want to give you an all-around view of what Bulletstorm's all about. Check out this episode. Let us know what you think in the show notes, and that will help us determine what future episodes of Co-op Critics look like on Secret Identity. Thanks a lot. Have a good week, and enjoy the discussion. And welcome to the very first as-yet unnamed Secret Identity gaming segment featuring myself and the guy that everyone knows, Mr. Dan Evans. How you doing today, sir?
How you doing, man?
I was going to call you the mayor, and I appreciate you taking time away from whatever celebrity luncheon you had today to talk for Secret Identity, because people have always heard on the show the stories of your fame and fortune and how you know everybody when we go to New York Comic-Con and all that kind of stuff. And
come on.
But I don't know if a lot of people were listening way back when we first interviewed you for Texas Strangers, which probably had to be about 4 years ago now, you think?
Let's see, yeah, because it was just when I had Matt, yeah, about 4 years.
So that was a pretty long time ago. Obviously, people know you on the boards as Stranger Dan.
That's me.
But a lot of people may not know that you are, in addition to being a television guru and a pop culture phenomenon, you are also an avid gamer. And one of the things that I have been thinking about lately for Secret Identity is the fact that we've kind of gotten away from having a regular gaming segment on the show. And I had also been talking recently about wanting to do some more in-depth stuff on the show,
right,
where it's not just a quick overview of something. So what you and I have been playing recently is the new shooter Bulletstorm for the Xbox 360, and now that we've both finished it, we've spent some time with multiplayer. I thought that would be a good kind of subject to start with for our first gaming segment. So I finished it literally about 10 minutes ago. Did you finish it yesterday?
I finished it, yesterday. I just burned through the last 3 chapters. I was surprised. One of the things I really like about it is how short it is.
I do too, and
not short, but it's a quick game, but there's a lot of replay value, I think.
It is, and I think that is kind of maybe counterintuitive to some people when they think about campaign length. There's a lot of talk nowadays about you spend $60 for a game, how long should the campaign be? And I think what you and I talked about off the air is that for different genres of games, I expect there to be very different lengths of a campaign. If I'm playing a role-playing game, I want anywhere from 20 to 100 hours of time to spend,
right,
depending on the world that they're creating. But when I'm playing a shooter, because the mechanics of a shooter are fairly repetitive, I really don't want a campaign that lasts 12 to 15 hours for a traditional shooter. And this...
I mean, well, the thing is, I mean, you look at a game, I mean, purely time put into it, like a game for like Left 4 Dead is technically, 6 hours of actual gameplay, but the actual play you get out of it. We've played, probably months of game time in that game now.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, is how much replayability you get out of it. And I think Bulletstorm is another one of those games where you can just play and play and play.
Yeah, we'll have to spend a whole segment at some point talking about how Valve designs their games, because they're just in another world.
Yeah.
In terms of like just the way that you pick up story elements during the course of the game. But Bulletstorm, I think, is maybe more accessible because it's so straightforward and so over the top that even people who are not fans of Call of Duty or even really that much into Gears of War or anything like that, I think if you're looking for a shooter to sort of just have fun with, then I think Bulletstorm is a great candidate for that, because it's just everything that it shows you in the first hour of the game, and then it spends the rest of the game letting you sort of use those tools in a lot of different environments, which I thought was kind of cool. But to give people the setup of the game, so basically Bulletstorm is a first-person shooter from Epic Games, who obviously published Gears of War, and People Can Fly, who some people may remember from the game Painkiller.
Oh, I missed that one.
Which was a very popular shooter and very known for its crazy weapons, which plays right into sort of what you see in Bulletstorm. And the story's essentially pretty straightforward, written by Mr. Rick Remender, who people know from Punisher, who people know from Fear Agent, which I think is what actually got him to be contacted to write the story for Bulletstorm, was the stuff he did on Fear Agent. And the setup is that it takes place in the future. You have this government-sanctioned like mercenary unit who have been basically going out and killing people for this government agency. And what they find out pretty early on in the game is that they have actually been killing innocent people. And so the main character, who is a guy by the name of, what the heck is his name? Grayson Hunt.
Grayson Hunt, yeah. Although he looks like Wolverine.
He does look like Wolverine. We could talk about that hairstyle in a minute. But so Grayson Hunt is the leader of this Dead Echo unit, which is the name of this unit. And he finds out that their unit has been being manipulated into killing innocent people. So he swears that he's going to seek revenge on his commanding officer, who is the guy that put them up to all of this. And that sort of becomes the focus of his life. And so we see that event probably in it's sort of the second beat of the game, and then the sort of opening is about his descent into almost madness as he tries to get revenge on this guy. And what he does in the beginning of the game is he basically goes on a kamikaze suicide mission with his ship full of misfits as he tries to ram it into this government battleship and take it down in order to take revenge on this guy. And the unintended consequence of it is that everybody crashes down onto this planet, and the planet is called Stygia, and it used to be a former like resort for rich people to go to off-world, and it was like a super huge spa and all that stuff, but it's been overrun by mutants and crazy plant life and all stuff like this. So both his ship and the ship of his nemesis crash onto this world, and it goes from primarily a revenge story to becoming a story about how do we get off of this planet. And he is saddled with the one remaining crew member, the only friend that he has left, a guy by the name of Ishii, whose body is so badly damaged in the beginning events of the game that he has to be made into sort of a half cyborg in order to even function, which is kind of where it gets into crazy sci-fi territory. But what did you think of sort of the setup of the game story-wise?
I like the story in one sense because it was like the anti-Firefly.
Right.
This band of lovable pirates or whatever. I'm surprised how much you gloss over how quick the setup is. They use it pretty much just for the tutorial for the game.
That is true.
And then you're pretty much into the actual game right away. But the sci-fi elements were interesting because it was a lot of things you've seen before, but done in a kind of postmodern take, I guess. The sort of thing you expect from Rick Remender, to kind of make fun of all the tropes that people are used to in their sci-fi universe. The pretty cities and the spaceships are dirty, kind of making fun of everything.
And it's unabashedly making fun of it. Like, not only he's simultaneously embracing it and making fun of it in the way that this game apologizes for nothing. This game is crass. It is frequently inappropriate, sometimes bordering on racist, completely insensitive to every possible group out there, from the mentally challenged to different sexual orientations. I mean, the laundry list goes on. It is offensive to everyone, and you sort of know that as soon as you get into the game. But you're right. In terms of the setup for the story, it is that quick. It is, hey, I don't like this guy, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ram my ship into his giant battleship and pretty much kill my entire crew, leaving one of them half robot.
Yeah, it's not even a spoiler. It's like the first chapter. You're just like, oh, goodbye, everybody.
Right, and then they sort of flash back and say, oh, well, here's why he hates that guy so much. He hates that guy because that guy made him kill a bunch of innocent people. The sort of subplot with his robot sidekick is that this was a guy on his team who was probably the most level-headed guy on the team, Ishii, and felt that he owed his life to Grayson Hunt because Hunt had saved his life one time before, which you actually see that happen. And so what happens when he becomes half cyborg is the cyborg part of him is just a logical robot that wants to kill Grayson because Grayson has done all these horrible things, but also really is just with him in order to get off of the planet. And so you've got the subplot of Ishii fighting the robot side of him, which could pretty much kill Grayson Hunt at any moment in time. And it's this sort of uneasy partnership where the entire game, Grayson is still kind of joking along with him, but also trying to appeal to the human side of him. Yeah. Because he feels like, hey, this is my last friend in the world, and I pretty much almost got this guy killed. I've resulted in his humanity almost being taken away.
Let me ask you this, though. Did you feel like Ishii and Grayson were kind of, I don't want to get too deep, into the thoughts of the game makers, but it felt like there was also a sort of subtext about the nature of gamers in general, about the guys who were just all about the straight kill, get to the objective, versus the guys who were just into it just for the goofs and the laughs. I felt like there's some sort of subtext that was being made about the people who play and love these types of shooters.
Well, you made a comment earlier, and again, this was before we started talking, of like half the stuff that comes out of the mouths of these guys over the course of the game are things that we would often blurt out during a session of Call of Duty or Battlefield Bad Company 2 or something like that. Just stupid things that you say. I mean, it's pretty much the online gaming culture, and even though we are much nicer to each other, the stupid things that come out of our mouth when we're playing online games, a lot of that is reflected in the sort of bromantic dialogue that these guys have over the course of the game, whether it's the one-liners or just the completely made-up words that they use when they get frustrated, which are, I mean, really funny, and we could list a whole bunch of new terms that we've learned over the course of the last 6 hours playing this game, some of which we've repeated, while we've been playing multiplayer and stuff. But yeah, I could see your point about there being a little bit of a mirror being held up to gamers there saying, this is kind of you guys.
It didn't really hit me until the third member of your crew shows up, who is female, and I'd just been reading that, fatugly.com, where all the girl gamers put up the most offensive things they've heard on Xbox Live.
Oh, I have not heard of that. We'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Well, you want to put a mature rating on that because it's pretty bad.
I would imagine that it is.
But it was interesting because the way the two of them react to her showing up is there's a lot of echoes there in what you see in the Xbox Live treatment of women gamers. And I just thought it felt like, and knowing Rick Remender, it felt like he was also making a little bit of statement about people who play Xbox Live.
Well, and just in the way that she did not automatically come into their group with any sort of respect, even though she was clearly a seasoned soldier. She had to earn their respect because they're dudes, and she's not a dude, and so she needs to prove to them that she can handle herself. And there is a lot of that, especially early on in their relationship, if you will.
Exactly. But enough with the academics. Let's get to the fun part of this.
So story aside, and the story is pretty much like someone said to Rick Remender, you know what, just kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And then we'll make a game around that. And so this is kind of his mind unleashed into this game. But the mechanics of the game are, like I said, they show you everything right up front. So it's a shooter, and there are a variety of guns that you have access to, and we can talk about some of the ones that were our favorite. And then they introduce this mechanic pretty early on in the game. So they let you spend a little time with the guns.
Yeah.
And you get to know how to use the guns. There's a running mechanic, and there's also a sliding mechanic. And so you hold down the run button to run, and you sort of double tap it to initiate a slide mechanic. And if anybody's seen the recent Japanese game that came out called Vanquish, that was a big mechanic in their game where you essentially would slide around the screen. In this one, you use it for particular purposes. So you've got your shooting mechanic, your sliding mechanic, your running mechanic, a pretty standard melee which involves kicking, and then you have what is called the leash, which is kind of like the gravity gun in some games, or if you've been playing Dead Space lately, a lot like Kinesis, where you're pulling things toward you, except what you're doing in this game is you are leashing enemies, and you are pulling them towards you so that you can then melee them into different parts of the environment, which are designed to eviscerate them in horrible and diverse ways.
It also reminded me, and I know this is a terrible comparison, but it also reminded me of the Ratchet and Clank mechanic with using the wrench.
Oh, yeah, because the wrench did have like a tether.
Yeah, they tether, both the tether and just the multi-tool use of it, because I don't want to underplay that the leash is super useful through the game, not just for the fighting, but also just in interaction with the environment.
That's a good comparison, too, with Ratchet and Clank, because there are a lot of weapons. Ratchet and Clank is known primarily for the amazing weapons that you have access to, and there are some weapons in this game that I think would feel right at home in a Ratchet and Clank game.
I agree. Oh, the weapons in this game.
So, like you said, the leash mechanic plays a big part. And so what you end up doing in the first hour is sort of learning how to use all those tools. And then instead of giving you new mechanics to deal with over the course of the game, and I really liked this sort of design philosophy, what they do is they vary the environments to allow you to use the same tools in new appealing ways. So,
right.
You know, when we talk about environments, you have like giant cactus plants that you can kick people into that they'll get skewered on, or there'll be giant Venus flytraps that you can kick dudes into and they'll get eaten. And then later in the game, there's a series of electrical storms that start happening over the course of this planet, and you can actually kick people out a window into these lightning storms and they'll get electrocuted, or hanging wires, or pools of acid,
or signs,
or, you know, turbines, or helicopters. Right. In one scene, you know, the helicopter propeller and stuff like that. So just imagine that you are either shooting enemies or you are pulling them towards you so that you can direct them toward whatever environmental hazards are out there. And you really need to be able to do both of those, because you are constantly being scored by the creativeness that you use to get rid of enemies.
Yeah, and the creativeness translates into points to upgrade your weaponry or buy new weapons.
Right, it becomes the currency of the game. And so if you try to take a very vanilla approach where you're literally just trying to shoot all your enemies and take them down with your standard gun and things like that, you'll quickly find that you're earning so little currency along the way that you have no money to upgrade your weapons, you have no money to buy additional ammunition.
Yeah, that's the part that kills you.
So you have to be creative, and it's kind of this reinforcing mechanic that once you get into it, you do start approaching every new level from a standpoint of, okay, what's around me? How could I be creative here? I'm assuming that you used one of the same mechanics that I picked pretty early on, which is I take cover behind something deadly, and then I leash enemies and pull them straight towards me into that deadly thing that I'm hiding behind.
Believe it or not, it took me a good 3 chapters before it occurred to me to try that. I was all about the new weapons and new ways to find a use for them.
Well, that's interesting, because I think for me, I'm a bit of a coward when it comes to playing shooters, where I am not a run and gun type of guy where I'm running into the middle of the action and firing all over the place. I like to methodically hide behind cover and see what's going on, and then sort of strategize my attack from there. And so for me, cover is always the first option. So I gravitated towards cover right away, and pretty soon I said to myself, I wonder if I can actually leash like right through this and just pull somebody towards me without having to step out of cover. And once I figured that out, that became strategy number one throughout most of the game for me.
Whereas I am, I believe the scientific term is an idiot, and I would just I'm trying to get to the end goal, so I just blazed through as fast as I could, and I was fascinated because one of my favorite things about the most recent spate of games is the interaction with the environment. And I love destructible environments and so forth, and just being able to kick a guy and then kick him over into a cactus or, one of the old signs from the tourist area and shock a guy. Using all of that was much more interesting to me than shooting a guy.
Or shooting some of the plant life actually is toxic to the point where you can shoot like a pod of something and it'll emit a gas that has the enemies turn on each other.
Exactly. Although I was a big fan of the one that you can kick the bulbs off of and it lands on their heads.
And distracts them, and then you can take them out that way. And of course, there's exploding red barrels everywhere, so you can use those to leash them towards yourself, kick them back into a group, or you can wait till enemies group around something and take them out that way. And so it just has a great way of really putting the tools in your hands. They're fairly easy to learn, and then giving you lots and lots and lots of opportunities to be really creative. And you find pretty early on that you have to be somewhat creative, at least, if you're going to be successful in the game.
Right. And as a baseball fan, I'm a big stat monster, so I was, of course, immediately drawn to looking at my stats every time you stop at the leash points to reload your ammo to see what kind of attacks I was using the most or what guns were my best guns.
So let's talk about some of the weapons, because you have access to, I want to say, at least 6 different weapons. You start off with the Peacemaker carbine rifle, which is your pretty standard, automatic weapon that you slap the clip in. Almost everything in the game has a secondary fire, and the secondary fire on this is that you charge up like a super shot that is kind of like the equivalent of a shotgun to a regular handgun. It's just a much more powerful bullet. And so you get that, and you can always keep that with you, and I use that for a great deal of the game. But then you have about 6 other weapons that range from everything from a sniper rifle to a to a pistol to the flail gun.
Flail gun.
Which I'll let you talk about the flail gun, because that was a favorite of both of ours. So
yeah, the flail gun is I want to say there's a version of it in Gears of War. But it's basically, it fires 2 grenades attached to a chain, and the chain flies across the map and can wrap around an enemy, can stab into a wall. You can set it up all sorts of ways. You can wrap it around their legs, makes them trip, and then the guys walking behind them will all run up to him, and then you can pull the trigger a second time, and it would explode the grenades, or just let them go off whenever you want, which leads to endless amounts of fun with that particular weapon.
And the secondary fire on that gun is that you will charge it up to the point where the chain that holds the 2 grenades together can literally slice through enemies.
Oh, yes, right. And it's probably the best gun for fighting the mini-bosses, in my opinion. I think it takes them down fastest.
So let's talk about the mini-bosses a little bit. So the mini-bosses are not only just powered-up regular dudes, but they have armor on them, and you essentially have to disable their armor before you can actually take them out. And as you mentioned, the flail gun, which does so much damage if you latch it to one individual, you can use a couple of good shots from the flail gun to get them in that vulnerable position where you can take them out. And once you sort of figure that out, you can pretty much make short work of the mini-bosses throughout most of the game, is what I found.
And also it's interesting because, I mean, this is true with all of the weapons, but it's interesting that the flail gun, depending on where on the target you shoot, changes what happens next. You can, when you wrap it around their arms, then they're incapable of shooting anymore. You can shoot them around the legs and they fall over. You can get them around the neck, and that's a whole different achievement, or you decapitate the guy. But it was interesting to me to watch as I'm playing, to see that much kind of detail happen, where sometimes you might actually miss a shot and just end up taking a guy's arm off, which still stops him from shooting at you, of course, but, and then goes behind him and explodes. And it was just fun that every time you thought you knew all the different ways you could use any of the weapons, you would find a new way to use any of the weapons.
Right.
Which made the game infinitely much more fun to me than just a straight-up shooter like Gears of War.
One of the weapons that I really grew to love over the course of the game was the sniper rifle, which I believe is called the Headhunter. And the way that the sniper rifle works is you zoom in, and it actually shows you a view of all of your targets. It highlights them for you. And when you pick the one that you're going to fire at, you fire the bullet, and it goes into bullet camera mode, where you're literally following the bullet as it goes near to the target. And when it gets within about 10 yards of the target, you actually then assume control of the bullet and can guide it. If you've ever seen the movie Runaway with Tom Selleck and Gene Simmons, it's very much like that, where you or when the guy shoots the arrow in Army of Darkness and it hits the dude in the back when he's trying to run out of the castle. Like, it's that sort of a view, and you can control this thing, and the controls are pretty decent on it, and the enemies that you're usually trying to shoot with that are enemies that are very quick. So quick, in fact, that you can't leash them. And so you're trying to get the bullet and try to anticipate which way they're going to roll or which way they're going to dive to take them out. And as you mentioned with the grenade, with the flail gun, depending on where you hit them will depend on how many points you get, whether or not there's any sort of additional boosts or anything like that. And once you start to get pretty good with that, you are able to then get guys who are behind cover, get guys who are up 3 floor levels up from you. You can actually almost go up the side of a wall and come right back down on top of them. So when you start to master the arc that the bullet can actually go on, that weapon, for me, got more and more fun as the game went on.
Two of my favorite things about the Headhunter, because I'm not a big fan of sniper rifles in any game, really. I find it hard to use them. But I loved about the Headhunter is that, you could hit a guy, and if there was a red barrel behind him, you would continue through him and then hit the barrel, and you can get an environmental explosion there. And it was nice because all the other games, most of the times when you shoot a sniper rifle, once it hits somebody, it's over.
Right.
And it was nice. It was a nice addition and a surprise there. And the other thing is that the charge effect for the sniper rifle, which allows you to do the same thing as the sniper, but you could completely miss and hit the right trigger, and then explode the bullet and still get your target, even if you missed them. So that's a great incentive to use it for people who are terrible with the sniper rifle, like myself.
Right, and that's a really good point, because they do that with a lot of the secondary fires with the weapons, is that everything that they show you and teach you how to do in the game has a way of being utilized that will appeal to someone. Like for some of the weapons, exactly. Like for some of the weapons, I hardly ever used the secondary fire on the weapon at all.
Yeah.
But for a lot of weapons, I did use, and probably my favorite quote unquote secondary fire of any weapon in the game has to be the leash's ability, which is called the Thumper.
Oh, yes.
And so what the Thumper does is when you go and leash an enemy, you normally pull them towards you. When you hold down the button, what happens is you wrap the leash around an enemy, and then it sets off almost what looks like an EMP charge, which causes a shock wave that throws all the enemies up into the air and out in all different directions. And depending on where you do that,
in bullet time.
Yes, exactly. And so if you do that in a room that has sort of hazards on the ceiling, or if you do it in one of those environments where there's a lot of the cactus around and stuff like that, then you will send them all flying into those hazards.
Exactly.
If you do it out in the wide open, you will send them so far up in the air that you can then do target practice with them while they're up in the air. And depending on how far they go, they'll just die when they hit the ground.
Yeah.
In some cases, though, if you're doing it in a space where that fall is not that great, they will actually survive it. And so you have to kind of learn, what are the best environments for me to use this thing in? When I get into the third act of the game, where you're facing the government-sanctioned soldiers who are sort of elite enemies, you're facing them in a lot of enclosed spaces with a lot of hazards around, and I would not have made it through the last couple chapters of the game without the Thumper, because that is capable of clearing a room full of enemies pretty quickly if you time it right and you choose the right enemy to use it on. Right. You want to get as many people around the epicenter as possible, and if you do that right, devastating results.
It's also good just it slows down anything that you can't kill immediately, because it works even up to a mini boss.
Yeah, and even some of the yes, and so some of the mini bosses were actually creatures, and it would stun them so that you could then run up and like melee them into whatever the environmental hazard was. Because some of those mini bosses required you to use the environment to kill them. You were not capable of just taking them out yourself,
Right.
Especially with the creatures. And so using the leash to do the thumper and actually stun them was a great way to then be able to set them up for the big kill.
And it's also really the only way to kill a helicopter.
Yes, and it results in some of the most visually crazy scenes in the entire game, because you're talking about, you might have a room full of 15 enemies and all of them go flying, and you get different bonuses based on what they hit and where they go and all this kind of stuff. So it's really, that becomes extremely fun.
Now, did you find yourself getting addicted to seeing how many things you could get on the screen at once? You know, the fly swatters and the punctured and all the different skill shots, and seeing how many of them you can get at once.
What it does, interestingly, is in most games when you run into an area that is just overpopulated with enemies, that's a bad thing. And in Bulletstorm, depending on what environment it is that you run into, that could actually be a good thing. Like whenever I would run into, like if I'm in a building and I know I'm in an enclosed space and I run into a room with a ton of enemies, that actually got me excited, because then I was like, okay, these guys can't go anywhere. Now this is the perfect time for me to use this particular weapon. And then, so my goal was like, okay, if I sneak over here and I get behind this one area, then I can probably catch like 10 of these guys at the same time.
Or I could kick this trash can over there, set them all on fire, then dump them up in the air. Yeah. And you start thinking of these huge strategies instead of just the usual twitch reflex where you just want to just shoot everything and then get out of the room.
Which, again, I think is one of the sort of the interesting things that keeps you going, because we talked about the story, and the story is not mind-shattering, but it is entertaining. To me, it felt like I was saying before, because you and I compare everything to movies, I was saying it felt like Tango and Cash meets like Beyond Thunderdome, where you have almost this reluctant buddy movie where these two guys are going through, and even though some of the stuff was so cliched and so over the top, I always wanted to know what happened next.
Yeah.
And it always kept me coming back, and you combine that with the really entertaining way that you approach enemies, and it never got stale for me, even though you have a fairly limited set of mechanics that you're using. In most shooters, that gets stale towards the end of the game. In this one, the environments and the little bits of story is what kept me kind of going through the finish.
Everything in it, they find a way to twist it in the next chapter so that you're still finding new things about the game. I thought that was really a great way to make the game work. And also, again, even though I play a lot of games, I don't think I'm really like a great gamer. And I love that this game works around that, where you can be a guy who's just an okay shooter, and you can find new ways to, improve your chances of living through a level instead of beating your head against the wall. Against the unstoppable space ninja forces that were coming at you.
So I think it's safe to say that we both really found the game entertaining and had a good time with it. That's not to say it's without its flaws. I mean, we mentioned that the story is not going to rival some of the more dramatic games that we've seen as of late. There are some times when the mechanics do get a little clunky. The AI partners that you have throughout the game, there are many times where they get in your way. And that can be really frustrating, especially when you're in a room full of enemies and you're not sure where you're getting killed from.
I don't know why exactly the AI is built specifically to default to running exactly in front of you.
Right. It's like their path is almost – it almost feels like a racing game where you have that rubber banding effect, where it almost pulls your guys – either right in front or right behind you. And there's times where there's a lot going on and you're in cover and you're trying to figure out what's going on, and the person who's on your team is literally right behind you and you can't turn around. And I'm sitting there getting frustrated because I'm like, what am I stuck on? I'm stuck on my own partner. And so that can be pretty frustrating. And then just there are times where, because you use buttons for multiple things, you'll want to climb over a piece of rubble, and you'll end up sliding into it 15 times, or because you're not standing at the right point in order to climb over it. So that can be a little clunky mechanically, or the good news is, in terms of the weapons, there's a great deal of aim assist, which essentially means that if you're in the general vicinity with most of your weapons, when you're firing at an enemy, you will hit them. And that's a good thing because this game doesn't do a great job with precision with its controls, but it makes up for it by making those controls very sticky. So, if you're near an enemy, you'll hit the enemy, and you don't have to be, a dead eye to really take these things down, which is good because the controls can be a little wonky at times.
Another thing I think we were both talking about is it's pretty much on the rails game. You're just being led through a track. But considering it's just open enough that you constantly find points where you get lost and you don't actually know where to go.
Yes.
Next, there's a couple of timed points where you have to get out of a building that's collapsing or through a spaceship or whatever, where you really have no idea and there's no visual clue to tell you where you're supposed to go. And I admit, okay, that's probably realistic, but, in playing a game, it'd be nice to just get a little bit of a clue as to where you're supposed to go next, so you're not just standing in a hallway that blows up or what have you.
And what makes that more complicated, too, is that they teach you things that you can do, but you can't do them all the time. So they'll teach you that you can use your slide mechanic to slide under rubble that is partially blocking a doorway. You can climb over stuff. And then what you'll do is you'll run into rooms or dead ends, as they turn out to be, or invisible walls, where there is something that very clearly 2 rooms before you were able to crouch and walk under. And now you're in this room, and you keep bumping into it, and you're not sure if it's the mechanics that are stopping you from bumping into that, or if it's just an area that you're not meant to go in. And as you mentioned, when you're trying to get out of a building, or there are, for lack of a better term, there are a lot of chase scenes in this game where you have to escape in time before the bomb blows up, or you have to escape because this thing is chasing you. And so there are some frantic moments where you're being timed, and you have to get out in a certain amount of time. And there's nothing in the world that's more frustrating than not making it out of an area because you are running into the geometry, or you're running into invisible walls, or you went down the wrong way because it looked like you could get under this thing, but you can't. So some frustration there, but it doesn't overshadow your enjoyment of the game, but it is some annoyances along the way.
Although, and this is weird because this was probably my favorite part of the entire game, and also the most frustrating. There's a section of the game where you pick up, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but you pick up a new type of weapon, and you get to basically cause mayhem in a tiny city with it. But you're being attacked by literally dozens of these guys, and you start getting shot, and there's no indication to tell you where you're being shot from or if the guy's just standing behind you.
Yeah, I mean, you can mention the fact that the most annoying enemy in the game is clearly what they call the vultures, which are enemies who are piloting these makeshift little helicopters. They're almost like something you'd see from G.I. Joe if they were a little more high-tech.
I think they were Mad Max.
Yeah, there you go. And they're tremendously frustrating because, as you mentioned, there's no indication other than if you happen to see the bullet hit you. There's no indication of where you're being shot from, and because those can be all over the map because they're flying, there are times where you'll have these vultures where there's like 3 of them around, and they're all flanking you, and you can't get a good idea of which one has a bead on you, or you're not sure where to go for cover, and that can be pretty... That can be pretty frustrating. If I had to pick one enemy that really frustrated me in the game, it was the vultures.
My favorite section, though, I'm just going to give you the clue. It's Waggington P. Tallywhacker.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We should talk about that because we're not going to spoil the end of the game, but the really cool thing is they have like almost because this is a resort. And one of the things that is very, I think, underrated about Bulletstorm is that it has a great color palette. And when you're used to playing the Modern Warfares and the Gears of Wars of the world that are very muddy and brown and gray, what you have here in Bulletstorm is you have a tropical, lush, vibrant, colorful world.
Beautiful blues and greens, water.
There's the graphics are great in some spots, not so great in others, but there were some really great vistas, and they usually do a good job with those throughout the game. And you're seeing these amazing, tropical locations with waterfalls and then jungles and then the city and all kinds of stuff like that. Well, within this sort of resort, they have almost like a Universal Studios thing.
Yeah, Space Disneyland.
Imagine, if you will, because clearly Godzilla was the theme for this, imagine, if you will, a theme park attraction where they have a model city set up and they have robotically controlled Godzillas that can rampage around the city. So the great thing about this section, which I know that you loved the same part as I did, is the first thing that you get to do is you get to go in this city. So you're human beings that are in a city that is a scale model of a regular city. And I would say a skyscraper is almost like to the average guy's shoulder. So you've got this city that you're running around, and it's got toy cars going around and stuff like that, and you're fighting enemies within that. And then when you're done sort of rampaging around that city, then something amazing happens, and I'll let you take it from there, Dan.
Yeah, you've broken the city, basically, and the rampaging monster comes out of the model and comes after you, and you actually get to take over control of it and use it as a weapon against your enemies. And it's actually, like a good 30 feet tall.
Yeah, and you get to use it for, I mean, it's not something you use throughout the game, but you get to use it for a solid, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Where, instead of Godzilla breathing fire, this thing, shoots.
It shoots lasers out of its eyes, and it's got the crazy paw swipe.
And it has a very Godzilla-esque roar.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing. You get to rampage around with this thing, and you're basically using your leash to point a marker where you want it to go and what you want it to shoot at and that kind of stuff. And there is a good section of that level where you are just raining destruction upon your enemies, the buildings, everything around there, cars, trucks.
Yeah. And to come back to the writing, really, Remender really loved that section. There's some great dialogue all through there, including when you finally lose the robot.
Yes.
There's just these great lines all through it. Again, it feels like, this is written by a guy who actually plays these games, and he's just like, wouldn't it be crazy if you could do this or that? And then he just writes that into the game.
And ultimately, that's what makes a shooter stand out from all the rest, is in this game you can truly say, I get to do things in Bulletstorm that I do not get to do in any other game.
Yes.
And any game that can say that, I think, is, whether it's because of the writing or because of the mechanics that the developers put into it, I think that's what it takes to stand out. And that's why I'm pretty sure no matter what disparaging things people have to say about Bulletstorm, all of them will have to admit that it is entertaining.
Yeah.
As you go through, it is absolutely entertaining. It's it's Independence Day. It's a summer blockbuster. It's Transformers. You get to go through something that
it's better than Transformers.
It is better than Transformers. The story certainly is better than Transformers. But if you just suspend your disbelief and go with it, it's a super fun ride.
Yeah, and that was important for me because as you mentioned, we play pretty much regularly on a weekly basis, and this was the next big game to play. And I wasn't really excited about it. I like Gears, okay, and I've never been a Halo fan. And I'm not really actually a big first-person shooter fan. I tend to prefer the role-playing stuff and the third-person stuff. But, that first chapter, which is basically a tutorial disguised as the backstory, but that first chapter I was a little worried because you're just, it's all basic stuff with guns and running around corners and dark spaceships and so forth. And I was like, oh no, this is going to be the whole game. And then once the game really starts and you get into the real mechanics of Bulletstorm, both the storytelling and the way that the weapons and the environment are utilized throughout the game, all of a sudden you're brought into the game. And the more chapters I went through, the more I was like, wow, this is a really good game. And I was completely surprised. I was like, wow, I'm really enjoying this game. I want to play it more now.
In some ways, you almost feel like you didn't give it a fair shake when it first started because you expect to not be too impressed by it, and it wins you over pretty early on in the game, and it keeps winning you over as the game goes on. You're like, oh, you know what? That's pretty clever. There's always something happening where you're like, you know what? That was either pretty witty, whatever the dialogue was there, or that's pretty clever what they did in this level, or, that's an interesting twist that they put there.
Yeah, or, even when it's not, it's the game, it's just you find some new way to take out 15 guys at once. The first time you do that, you see that new skill point logo come up, and you're like, that was awesome. I'm really clever. Even when you're not thinking the game is clever, you're like, I'm clever.
Right.
You feel rewarded.
We're clever together.
Exactly. And, and you're laughing.
And that carries over into the multiplayer, which I think we should probably, unless you want to, we don't want to give away the ending, except to say that clearly there's the potential for Bulletstorm 2. So, which I don't think anybody. I mean, games these days, hardly any of them completely close off the ending where there's no possibility for a sequel. But so the multiplayer, the approach that they take to multiplayer is pretty unique as well, because almost every game that has multiplayer nowadays comes out with deathmatch, capture the flag,
Right.
your standard sort of modes that everybody's expected to have, and Bulletstorm pretty much eschews all of that. And it's interesting because you know that Gears of War 3 is going to have all of those things. So it's almost like Epic said, you know what, let's not even set these two up to even be in competition with each other in that way, because we can just do something completely different. And they wanted to really reinforce the idea of co-op. So the multiplayer modes, there's sort of two modes. The first one, which you have played and I have not, is called Echoes mode. And could you just kind of give people an overview of what Echoes mode is?
Echoes is basically, and I love it. Again, the game design is great for both the pro gamer and the newcomers. Echo, basically, each Echo is a section of the game that you've already played, and it allows you to play through it again and really try and get those skill points that you might have missed, or just build up as many points as possible and as many clever ways as possible. You're given a set choice of weapons. The scenario is set up, and you go through it from one checkpoint to the next checkpoint. And every time you do a new skill point, you get a huge bonus. And if you keep repeating it, then you only get the usual skill point value. So you're encouraged to try and do as many different skill point attacks as possible and get your highest score. And then it's thrown up on the leaderboard against all your friends who you have on your gamer list. It's a lot of fun, actually. It's addictive because you see your friend go up and he gets 3 stars compared to your 2 stars on that one map or that one Echo. And you have to jump back in and see if you can figure out what he did to get the extra points the next time through.
And that kind of thing is usually reserved for like racing games.
Yeah.
Where you have the, I just set the speed record in this particular thing. So I do like that they included that as if you just want to take 10 minutes and run through a level and try to score as many points as possible and throw that up there against your friends, then that's a great online mode for you that you really don't need anybody else to be a part of in order to enjoy that mode.
Yeah.
And then they have their full-blown multiplayer cooperative mode, which is for up to 4 players, and that, I believe, is called Anarchy mode.
Yes.
And so what Anarchy mode, which is it's exactly what it sounds like.
Well, it's funny because it's Anarchy, but the main thrust of it is actually cooperative teamwork.
Well, which is funny because when you play the game, I mean, you and I just finished talking about how you can have a million things going on the screen at once. It can be complete chaos with one person playing it.
Yeah.
Now what you do is you put 4 people into an arena, and then you have waves and waves of enemies come out, and all 4 of those people have a leash, have different guns, have different weapons, and are using the environment. So there's not a moment of those matches where you don't have bodies flying everywhere, explosions going off all over the place. It is pretty much anarchy. And as you mentioned, within that, what the underlying theme that they're hammering home to you is, if you don't learn to cooperate and play together, then you will only go so far in this mode. And that mode is not very far for you because the waves just keep coming and coming and coming. But you won't get past 10 modes if you don't find a way to work together, because what it requires you to do is score more and more points, which require more and more complex combos, and more importantly, team combos in order to score the big points to move forward. And you and I noticed some very interesting dynamics with our spectrum of friends who we play with online, because when you and I play online, I feel like we play similarly in that we like to play support classes.
Yeah.
So, you and I will be medics. If we're playing Battlefield Bad Company, we'll be medics, or we'll be a class that I want to be the class that helps the people that are like super accurate and are the run and gunners. Like, I want to get rewarded for being a good teammate. You know what I mean? And so this mode for us makes perfect sense. We're like, oh, great, this will be great because we'll be able to, share these achievements and we'll be able to do this stuff. But when you get your normal first-person shooter players that come into a mode like this, their sort of motor is on one speed, which is kill as many people as I possibly can, as fast as I can, and do it all by myself so that I get the highest score of anybody else. And after about 3 rounds in this anarchy mode, that system falls apart completely because what ends up happening is you end up stealing kills from your teammates, and you also end up missing out on all of these great combo opportunities, and that was maddening the other night when we were playing that game.
Yeah, by the end, I think we're all screaming at each other. It's like, you've got to kick and I've got to shoot. You can't steal that.
Right? Why would you do that? Why would you take
kicking him?
I can't help it. I thought that I was going to... So all the glory hogs are basically ruining it because they can't be patient enough, because what happens is, like, somebody will leash a guy from across the map. And if you are being a cooperative teammate, you're usually letting that happen because that person is lining them up for a certain shot, especially if it's not a team combo or something. Right. But inevitably, that's like watching candy fall out of a piñata for other people that are playing with you, and they're just diving on it. Like, they'll just grab the guy right out of midair, and they'll do something else with them. And so it can be very frustrating, but the game is a great training simulator for having to play cooperatively, which I think if we spend more time with this, with our regular group of friends, we will actually be better when Battlefield 3 comes out at being a unit. Because this game makes you do that, and it just breaks you of that whole I need to score the most, I need to be number one, because if you have that mentality going in, you will actually hurt your team.
We'll tell Jeff that.
Well, that's why. It's going to take a lot of training. It's going to take a lot of training simulations for that time. But that's a mode that, because of the never-ending nature of it, keeps you coming back to it. And you always know, even if the team's working well together, you could have done better.
Yeah, exactly. And you're always like, I could have got a few more points if I'd done this or that. Or you just realize that there's some big environmental thing that you totally missed out using. And
right.
We were doing so well with I had no idea that when we first played, I think I had just started the game, so I didn't know about the man-eating plants. And so I was missing a lot of opportunities where I could have kicked guys into there, set them up, shooting explosives in there. And then you're like, and if I'd known about that, I would have done this differently.
And the better you get with the mechanics, the more that you're able to time those things appropriately, like kicking a guy up in the air so somebody else can grab them and stuff like that. So it is definitely something that I want to continue playing. And I think based on getting the right group of people in a particular game, you can really go far and have a good time working together as a team. So interesting approaches to multiplayer. I think some traditional shooter fans might look at those multiplayer modes and think that they're a little bit light.
Yeah, I wonder what they would think.
But I think for what it's trying to do, it works extremely well. And so, if they put new maps out for that and some additional DLC down the road, maybe a couple of new weapons and stuff like that, I think that's more than enough to keep people who enjoy that mode coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mr. Ebert, as we wrap up our discussion, our 50-minute now discussion on Bulletstorm, what are your final thoughts on the game? I mean, you mentioned before it was a game that wasn't super on your radar, and I'm kind of like this too, we ended up picking up because it sounded like that was what everybody else wanted to pick up.
Exactly. A lot of people I know are picking it up for the big multiplayer elements, and I have to admit the single player won me over, though. I think if I just started playing the multiplayer, I might have enjoyed it a little bit and then probably put it back down, but having played through the single player, I am totally won over to the game. I actually would look forward to a sequel.
Yeah, I agree. I overall really enjoyed the game, had a fun time with it. It's a nice break from the games that I've been playing lately because it was just really popcorn fun to go through and very cathartic to just go through and really have a over-the-top action-style game. If shooters aren't necessarily your thing, I would still at least rent this or even pick it up when it drops in price a little bit, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised even if you're not a big shooter fan. And if you are a shooter fan, then this is something that it stands out from the crowd. So it's definitely worth playing.
Definitely.
So we haven't figured out our rating system yet, a thumbs up, thumbs down, worth playing, not worth playing. But I think we both agree on this one that...
it's 2 controllers up. I think somebody uses that.
So as we move forward with this gaming segment, there's a couple things that we've been kicking around. Number one is that we want to have discussions like this where we can get a little bit deeper into games, and if there's games that people really want to hear about, if those are games that we happen to be playing, we will gladly talk about them. You and I can talk about games that are coming up over the next several months that we want to have a discussion about. But we've also talked about maybe going back and talking about games from last year or the year before or whatever, or maybe games that are discounted now that we never picked up. Like I just picked up Enslaved Odyssey to the West for $20 because it dropped, and I heard it was actually a decent game. But so games like that. So we can go back and look at old games. We can play the big ones that are coming out. But the theme of this segment will be that we try to get a little bit more in depth with it than just sort of a 5-minute review. So yeah. And is there games that you're thinking of too, Dan, that are coming up that you're really excited to talk more about?
Well, definitely with Mass Effect 3 coming out soon, and of course Battlefield 3 coming out. I'd love to delve into both of those games and talk about the pluses and minuses of those, and it may be a comparison between Battlefield and Call of Duty, which seems to be a sore point. It seems to be the polarizers, those two games.
One of the things that we did last year with the Cartridge Cage segment is we had the summer challenge where we did 3 old school retro games, but maybe this summer we can do something where we decide to either go back and play like a Mass Effect 1 and a Mass Effect 2 and really have some discussions with people who are interested in playing that. Mm-hmm. Or some other games like that. But yeah, we should definitely set aside a segment for the Mass Effect talk. We should definitely set aside a segment for the sort of AAA shooter talk where it's Call of Duty and Battlefield, what's different between those two, why we like one over the other, because you and I are very much sort of in the same boat about why we really like Bad Company as a shooter and the things that it does that are different than Modern Warfare.
Although you had to win me over on Bad Company.
Yeah, well, because it I feel like Call of Duty has a lower barrier to entry, but Battlefield Bad Company has a higher sort of retention and just overall satisfaction because, as I mentioned, you're able to play different roles.
Yeah.
And with Modern Warfare, there may be different classes, but there's not a lot of different roles to play in that game.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's in Battlefield 3 looks ridiculously good. And that's come out. The other thing I would love to do, and I don't know if you've played through this game, but I would love to do a prolonged discussion on Half-Life 2 and then episodes 1 and 2.
I guess I should play them.
Oh, you totally should, dude. And if people are listening to this and they have not picked up the orange box yet, you can get the orange box for about $20, and it has Half-Life 2, then episodes 1 and 2, both expansions, plus Portal, plus Team Fortress 2 for $20. It's the greatest package ever put together for the 360, and that game does things that no other shooter does. And number one being probably the best storytelling I've ever seen in a shooter. So it's well worth checking out. So there you go. That's the first unnamed gaming segment that we'll have a name for by the next time that we record this. And Dan, it has been a pleasure.
Always.
And you and I will see each other online, but people can find you on the boards. And is there anything else going on with you that you want to plug right now? You do have a blog, and you like to go watch movies.
Yes, there's the Margarita Movies blog where me and 2 friends go have happy hour margaritas and watch movies of questionable taste. It's margaritamovies.tumblr.com. And I've got 6 pages in the upcoming Oni press comic for Yo Gabba Gabba, which I don't actually know when it's coming out yet. I believe it's this summer.
Well, the family in my house is very excited for that because we're huge Yo Gabba Gabba fans, so I cannot wait to see that.
I have a show I worked on at Nickelodeon, but that's not coming out till the fall.
And when it does, you'll be telling us all about it, I'm sure.
I sure will.
Well, fantastic. Then that is going to wrap up this unnamed gaming segment, and you and I will get together sometime soon and tackle another game.
Fantastic. See you then.
The necessities in life, like comic books, food, and gas, are not getting any cheaper. We can't do anything about the cover price, but you can shop around for a good discount to help you out. Or if you're one of the unfortunates who have lost their local comic book store, can Brian and I help you out? No, but Discount Comic Book Service can. At DCBS, it's so simple. You download your order form, you pick the shipping you want, whether it be weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, pick your books, and just like that, comic books delivered right to your front door. Need bags and boards with your books? Bam! You got them. Now, each and every month, you choose from hundreds of titles at 40% off. But for deeper discounts, there's books for 50% off and, amazingly, 75% off the cover price as well. That brings many books to $1.25 a copy. And how long has it been since you paid $1.25 for a new comic? And these are just a small sample of the discounts and incredible service offered at Discount Comic Book Service. So join many of the Secret Identity listeners that have experienced the ease and savings of DCBS. For more information, just go to www.dcbservice.com. And if trades are your game, www.instocktrades.com will blow you away with similar savings and a huge selection.